It all started with a leak. I was in D.C. that morning, sipping bitter black coffee in the back of a quiet Capitol Hill cafe when my phone buzzed. The name that flashed on my screen stopped me cold, Pam Bondi. We hadn't spoken in nearly 6 months, not since her last televised statement caused a ripple through the Attorney General's office. But this message wasn't public. It was private. And it was one word, ready. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But then I remembered the documents, the ones she had hinted about months ago. The sealed depositions, the mishandled campaign donations, and something about falsified subpoenas linked directly to Letitia James. Pam had been building something quietly, away from cameras, away from the chaos. And now, it looked like the storm was about to hit. An hour later, Pam Bondi walked into a press briefing in Tallahassee like she was holding a royal flush. Calm. Controlled. Confident. "We've uncovered a coordinated abuse of prosecutorial power," she said, her voice echoing across the country. "And we have the evidence. The state of New York will answer." Behind her, her legal team placed 3 boxes of evidence onto the podium. No one could have predicted what came next. The room fell into silence as the cameras zoomed in on the boxes behind Pam. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She let the tension build like a coiled spring, then released it with 5 words that would shake the nation: Leticia James falsified legal records. Gasps erupted from the press pool. The headline wrote itself. Pam turned slightly, nodding to her lead counsel, a steely-eyed former federal investigator named Mark Greaves. He opened the first box and pulled out a stack of notarized affidavits. Each document was stamped, signed, and sealed. "These affidavits," Mark began, "come from whistleblowers inside the New York AG's office. They detail systematic misconduct, targeted legal intimidation, and manipulation of evidence in politically sensitive cases, all directed by Leticia James." Then came the audio. Bondi's team played a recording, scratchy but clear, of a late-night strategy call. The voice on the tape sounded unmistakably like Leticia James: "We're not here for truth. We're here to win. I don't care if it means bending the law." Journalists scrambled for their phones. Reporters whispered in disbelief. Within minutes, every major news outlet had broken the story: Pam Bondi accuses New York AG of corruption, audio evidence released. Back in New York, Leticia James was silent. Too silent. But Pam? She wasn't done yet. "The Department of Justice has been briefed," she said, her voice colder now. "We're cooperating with a federal task force. And subpoenas are already in motion." At that moment, the political winds shifted. And in the background, sirens could be heard, not in Tallahassee, but in downtown Manhattan. By noon, downtown Manhattan was in chaos. Federal agents, not local cops, swarmed the New York Attorney General's office. Their presence was unmistakable: navy blue jackets with bold yellow letters. DOJ. FBI. IRSCID. Leticia James wasn't in her office. She had left early that morning, reportedly for a fundraiser in Albany. But her staff wasn't so lucky. Pam Bondi had triggered something bigger than anyone expected. The subpoenas weren't just real, they were live. Computers were being seized. Internal emails, texts, encrypted phone logs, all under federal scrutiny. Reporters were practically sprinting out of the building, phones glued to their ears. Meanwhile, back in Florida, Pam Bondi was already one step ahead. She stood before a second podium now, not in a courtroom, but in a private Senate briefing room. Behind closed doors, she delivered a confidential presentation to a bipartisan Congressional Oversight Committee. The screen behind her displayed a chain of financial transactions. There are offshore accounts linked to shell companies, all tied to campaign contributions and prosecution decisions made by Leticia James' office, Pam explained. And here's the kicker: those funds weren't just for politics. They were personal. A senator from Illinois leaned forward. Are you saying the Attorney General laundered campaign funds for herself? Pam didn't hesitate. I'm saying it's worse than that. She used her office to silence donors who wouldn't play ball, and reward the ones who did. This wasn't justice. It was a racket. In New York, Letitia's legal team rushed to release a statement. They called the accusations dangerous, false, politically motivated. But it was too late. The public tide was turning, and fast. And then, late that evening, a sealed indictment was filed in federal court. Leticia James had officially become a target of a criminal investigation. By the next morning, it was official. The indictment against Leticia James was unsealed in the Southern District of New York. It spanned 43 pages and read like a political thriller, except this wasn't fiction. Counts included obstruction of justice, abuse of power, witness intimidation, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Pam Bondi appeared on national television just hours later. Calm. Prepared. Deadly precise. This isn't about party lines, she said. This is about corruption at the highest levels of law enforcement. Leticia James betrayed the public's trust, and she's going to face the consequences. The media reaction was immediate and polarized. Cable news hosts clashed. Social media exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Bondi bombshell and hashtag James indicted began trending worldwide. Protesters gathered outside both the New York AG's office and the federal courthouse. Chants of "No one is above the law" echoed through the streets. In a desperate move, Leticia James held a brief press conference via live stream. She looked tense. Gone was the composed, commanding figure of months past. "These charges are a hit job," she said. "Pam Bondi is trying to destroy my career for political gain. I will not be intimidated. I will fight this with everything I have." But her words rang hollow. Because while she spoke, footage emerged, security cam video from inside the AG's office, showing James shredding documents 2 days before the FBI raid. And behind closed doors, federal prosecutors were already working on something else, a detention motion, citing risk of evidence tampering and obstruction. Pam Bondi didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Because now, the court, and the country, were watching. The courtroom was packed. Every major news outlet sent reporters. Seats were filled with legal analysts, political operatives, and off-duty attorneys hoping to witness history. Even the marble walls of the Southern District Courthouse seemed to buzz with tension. Leticia James arrived under heavy escort. She didn't wear her usual confident smile. Today, she looked cornered. Pam Bondi sat quietly near the front row, not as a prosecutor, but as a witness and whistleblower. She nodded to her legal team but kept her eyes locked on the bench. Judge Eleanor Reese, a no-nonsense federal judge with a reputation for dismantling corrupt prosecutors, entered the room. "Let's begin," she said curtly. "We're here to address the United States motion for pretrial detention of the defendant, Leticia James." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the defendant has already been captured on video destroying evidence. We believe she poses a clear risk to the investigation and should be remanded without bail." Letitia's attorney objected, calling the footage taken out of context and arguing that she had deep ties to the community. But the judge wasn't buying it. "Ms. James, did you or did you not order the removal and destruction of documents pertinent to an active investigation?" Leticia swallowed hard. I didn't know they were under subpoena." Pam Bondi rose from her seat. "Your Honor, she knew. I warned her, 6 weeks prior. I have the email." Murmurs swept across the courtroom. The judge tapped her gavel. "Enough. Ms. Bondi, submit that email to the clerk. Ms. James, based on the presented evidence and the risk posed to this case, I hereby order you to be remanded into federal custody pending trial." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Leticia James didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply stood, turned, and extended her wrists as the bailiff approached. The cuffs clicked. Pam closed her eyes for a moment, not in triumph, but in closure. Justice wasn't a headline anymore. It was real. By sunset, the nation was in political freefall. The image of Letitia James being led out of federal court in handcuffs was already etched into the public's mind. It looped endlessly on every news channel, triggering instant reactions across the political spectrum. Some called it revenge. Others called it restoration. But no one called it small. Back in Florida, Pam Bondi held a short press briefing outside the Capitol. She didn't gloat. She didn't take shots. She simply stated the facts. This isn't about personalities. This is about accountability. No one, no matter their position or power, gets a pass for weaponizing justice. Reporters threw question after question at her. Will more names come out? Is this linked to any ongoing investigations? Were federal officials complicit? Pam paused, then dropped the hammer. We're not done yet. That same evening, leaks began surfacing online, emails between Leticia James and senior campaign donors discussing favorable legal outcomes, encrypted group chats with staff strategizing how to bury whistleblowers, internal memos outlining PR damage control protocols for when evidence eventually surfaced. The public was livid. Polls swung wildly. Prominent politicians began distancing themselves from James. People who just weeks earlier had praised her legal fearlessness now fell silent. And then came the bombshell. The DOJ confirmed that 2 more state-level prosecutors and a former aide to James had entered cooperation agreements in exchange for testimony. The case was expanding. Letitia wasn't going down alone. Pam Bondi, meanwhile, had just been summoned to Washington for a closed-door meeting with the House Judiciary Committee. They wanted to know how deep the rot went. And Pam was ready to tell them. The next morning, Pam Bondi walked into the U.S. Capitol with a sealed folder under her arm and a convoy of federal marshals by her side. The media was kept at bay, but that didn't stop the speculation. Rumors swirled like wildfire, that the folder contained names, connections, even ties to federal judges. Inside a secure conference room, the House Judiciary Committee sat waiting. Both Republicans and Democrats were present, their expressions tense. No one was smiling. Chairman Holt, a seasoned lawmaker with a sharp tongue, opened the session. Ms. Bondi, we understand you've come forward with evidence beyond what was disclosed in the Letitia James case. Is that correct? Pam didn't flinch. That's correct, Chairman. The corruption wasn't isolated. It was coordinated. And it involved individuals at the federal level. She opened the folder and passed copies to the committee. What followed was an hour of bombshells. Pam laid out a timeline of manipulation, stretching back nearly 4 years. She revealed email exchanges between James and officials in the Department of Justice that strongly suggested collusion, the selective targeting of political rivals, the suppression of complaints against allies, and the rerouting of funds originally allocated for legal aid. One member of the committee leaned back, visibly shaken. You're telling us federal officials knew this was happening, and did nothing? I'm saying, Pam replied, some of them helped cover it up. Gasps. Pens dropped. Staffers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Chairman Holt's voice hardened. This committee will need to verify every one of these claims. But if they hold up, and I say this with full weight, this could trigger the largest internal justice probe in modern U.S. history. Pam nodded. That's why I came here. As the hearing recessed, a congressional staffer whispered into the chairman's ear and handed him a phone. His face went pale. He looked up. We've just received word, federal agents have issued a warrant for a sitting federal judge. The dominoes were falling. And Pam Bondi had just tipped the first one. The arrest of a sitting federal judge sent a shockwave through every legal institution in the country. Judge Roland Mercer, a once respected name in the Southern District, was taken into custody in the early morning hours. He had been privately advising Leticia James and allegedly shielding key parts of her operation from judicial scrutiny, approving search warrants against political opponents while rejecting those that targeted her allies. The warrants cited bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction. By noon, another bombshell dropped: a senior DOJ official had quietly resigned. No statement. No press release. Just a short note left on his desk in an empty parking space behind the agency's D.C. headquarters. Behind the scenes, an emergency meeting was called at the White House. Trust in the justice system was crumbling, and the administration needed damage control fast. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi was summoned again, this time to a federal oversight task force formed specifically to investigate institutional corruption stemming from the James case. She walked in with 2 new folders. This, she told them, includes testimony from 2 former aides in the New York AG's office who were blackmailed into silence. And this one, she paused, tapping the second folder, contains the financial trail linking offshore accounts to a consulting firm that Judge Mercer's wife just happens to own. The room went still. The task force chair, a former prosecutor himself, rubbed his temple. You've just connected the judiciary, campaign finance fraud, and the DOJ in one sweep. Are there more? Pam didn't blink. 2 more names. I'll release them once the next subpoenas are secure. Back in New York, Leticia James sat in federal custody, no bail, no media appearances, no more control. Her defense team scrambled, but the walls were closing in. Inside her holding cell, she received word that her chief of staff had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Her expression didn't change. She knew what that meant. Everyone was flipping. The trial began under the kind of national spotlight reserved for only the most explosive scandals in American history. Leticia James, once a rising star, now stood trial in the same city where she once commanded the legal system. This time, though, the cameras weren't there to applaud her press conferences, they were watching for her downfall. The prosecution's opening statement was surgical: this case isn't about politics. It's about power, misused, abused, and weaponized. Ms. James didn't just cross ethical lines, she buried them. Pam Bondi took the stand on the second day. The room fell into a hush as she walked to the witness box. She testified for 6 straight hours, presenting emails, voicemails, confidential memos, and detailed timelines. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as she exposed how Leticia James used her office like a political machine, rewarding loyalty, punishing dissent, and silencing whistleblowers through fear and favors. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. A former prosecutor under James, someone no one expected to speak, took the stand under protection. He testified that James ordered cases altered, evidence suppressed, and had even targeted private citizens for political retaliation. The courtroom gasped when he confirmed she had once said behind closed doors, "They'll never touch me. I am the law here." That quote would become the headline seen around the world. After weeks of trial, the jury deliberated only 14 hours. Guilty. On all 17 counts. Leticia James stood motionless as the verdict was read. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply stared ahead, as if still trying to process the collapse of everything she had built. Pam Bondi watched from the gallery. There was no smile, no fist pump, just quiet resolve. Justice had spoken. In the days that followed, congressional hearings ramped up. More officials were investigated. New reforms were introduced. The ripple effect of Pam's exposure reshaped the legal system in ways no one could have predicted. And Leticia James? She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Her legacy, rewritten. Pam Bondi didn't disappear after the trial. She was offered everything from a Senate seat to a federal position. But she declined. "I didn't do this for power," she told a reporter. "I did this because someone had to." 6 months later, the dust hadn't fully settled, but the landscape had changed. The Department of Justice launched an internal integrity oversight division, directly influenced by the fallout of the James case. Several federal officials quietly retired or were reassigned. A total of 9 individuals across state and federal offices were either indicted, removed, or placed under investigation due to evidence Pam Bondi brought forward. But the biggest shift wasn't legal, it was cultural. Public trust in the justice system had hit a low point, but the exposure also sparked an unprecedented wave of reform movements, calls for transparency laws, and a renewed push to protect whistleblowers. The message was clear: no one would be untouchable again. Pam Bondi kept a low profile. She turned down every book deal, declined a Netflix docuseries, and refused to monetize the case. "I'm not here to profit off corruption," she told one journalist. "I'm here to make sure it never happens again." But her actions didn't go unnoticed. She was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in a quiet White House ceremony. No cameras, no speeches, just a simple handshake and a few quiet words from the president. "You reminded the system who it serves." Meanwhile, Letitia James began her sentence at a medium-security federal prison. She attempted an appeal, but it was rejected within weeks. Her political allies vanished. Her name, once bold on billboards and campaign posters, was now a cautionary tale taught in law schools. The closing chapter came with the release of an official DOJ report titled, "The Bondi Doctrine: Rebuilding Legal Integrity in a Post-James Era." The document laid out a new national framework for prosecutorial accountability, inspired by the very scandal that nearly tore the system apart. And at the bottom of the final page was a single quote: "Justice is not a weapon. It's a responsibility." Pam Bondi. A year had passed since the conviction. The courthouse that once echoed with press conferences and protests now stood quiet, but its shadow lingered over every elected office in the country. Pam Bondi had become a symbol, not of political vengeance, but of institutional accountability. She'd returned to private life, far from the spotlight, teaching ethics at a law school in Florida. No security detail. No entourage. Just a woman who had stood her ground, and won. One rainy afternoon, she received a handwritten letter. It wasn't from a politician, or a journalist, or even a former colleague. It was from a young law student in Georgia. "I wanted to quit. I thought the law was too corrupt to change. Then I watched what you did. And now I'm staying in this fight, because of you." Pam folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box labeled, "Keep Going." That night, she walked outside under the stormy sky, the air thick with distant thunder. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe, not in victory, but in peace. The fight wasn't over. It never truly was. But she had done her part. She hadn't just taken down a corrupt attorney general. She had pulled back the curtain on a broken system, and forced the country to look. Leticia James, now inmate #46729-013, watched from a prison television as yet another legal reform package passed Congress, legislation that bore her name in shame. In her cell, she muttered, "Pam Bondi," but no one was listening anymore. The system she once twisted had outgrown her. Justice, real justice, had found its voice again.